Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted the heavy stack of classified files in her arms. The Pentagon's corridors buzzed with their usual morning energy, filled with military personnel rushing between meetings and briefings. To everyone who passed her, she appeared to be just another aide, someone whose job was to fetch coffee, organize schedules, and ensure the important people had everything they needed. At 28, Sarah had grown accustomed to being overlooked. Her modest Navy uniform bore no impressive ribbons or commanding insignia. She wore simple black-rimmed glasses that gave her a studious appearance, and her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that suggested efficiency rather than authority. Most people's eyes would slide right past her, focusing instead on the admirals, generals, and other high-ranking officials who commanded attention wherever they walked. The truth was far more complex than anyone realized. Sarah wasn't just any aide, she was a highly decorated intelligence officer working undercover. Her real identity was Commander Sarah Martinez, a naval intelligence specialist with clearance levels that would surprise even some admirals. But her current assignment required complete anonymity, and she had spent months perfecting the art of invisibility. Her mission was delicate and dangerous. For the past 6 months, she had been investigating suspected security breaches within the Pentagon itself. Someone with high-level access was selling classified information to foreign agents, and the investigation had narrowed down to a small group of senior officials. Sarah's role was to observe, gather evidence, and report back to Admiral Robert Hayes, one of the few people who knew her true identity and rank. As she walked through the hallway, Sarah noticed Colonel Richards approaching from the opposite direction. He was one of her primary suspects, a man whose gambling debts had recently become substantial enough to motivate questionable decisions. Richards barely glanced at her as they passed, treating her with the casual dismissiveness reserved for support staff. "Watch where you're going," he muttered when she accidentally bumped his arm while juggling the files. "Sorry, sir," Sarah replied meekly, playing her role perfectly. Inside, she was cataloging every detail of his behavior, noting the slight tremor in his hands and the way his eyes darted nervously around the corridor. These were signs of stress that could indicate guilt, or simply the pressure of military life. Sarah's day was carefully structured to maximize her intelligence-gathering opportunities. As Admiral Hayes' supposed aide, she had access to high-level meetings, classified documents, and private conversations that would be impossible to obtain through traditional investigation methods. She attended briefings where strategic decisions were made, served coffee during sensitive negotiations, and organized files that contained some of the military's most closely guarded secrets. The irony wasn't lost on her that her gender and modest appearance worked to her advantage. In an environment still dominated by men, many officials felt comfortable speaking freely around women they perceived as non-threatening support staff. They would discuss classified operations while she stood quietly in the corner, assuming she lacked the security clearance or intellectual capacity to understand the significance of their words. During lunch breaks, Sarah would retreat to a small office that Admiral Hayes had arranged for her use. There, surrounded by filing cabinets and administrative supplies, she would compile her observations into detailed reports. She documented suspicious behaviors, noted unusual patterns in document access, and tracked the movements of her suspects through their daily routines. One afternoon, while organizing Admiral Hayes' schedule, she overheard a heated phone conversation in the adjacent conference room. General Morrison, another suspect on her list, was speaking in hushed tones about delivery schedules and compensation packages, language that seemed inconsistent with legitimate military operations. Sarah positioned herself near the door, pretending to dust the furniture while straining to hear more details. General Morrison's voice carried a tension she had learned to recognize, the particular stress that comes from engaging in activities that could end a career or worse. "The timeline has moved up," Morrison was saying. "Our friend is getting impatient, and frankly, so am I. This arrangement was supposed to be temporary." The conversation ended abruptly when Morrison noticed Sarah's presence in the hallway. He emerged from the conference room with a stern expression, his eyes narrowing as they settled on her. "How long have you been standing there?" he demanded. Just arrived, sir, Sarah replied, maintaining her submissive demeanor while internally celebrating this breakthrough. Admiral Hayes asked me to prepare the conference room for his 3 o'clock meeting. Morrison studied her for a moment longer before nodding curtly and walking away. Sarah knew she had just witnessed something significant, but she also realized that her cover might be starting to attract unwanted attention. Later that evening, Sarah met with Admiral Hayes at a discreet location outside the Pentagon. They had established a routine of brief, informal meetings that appeared to be casual encounters between a superior and his aide. Tonight, they sat in Hayes's car in a parking garage, speaking in low voices while maintaining the appearance of reviewing tomorrow's schedule. Morrison is definitely involved, Sarah reported, sharing the details of the overheard conversation. He's feeling pressure from someone, possibly his foreign contact, and he's getting careless. Admiral Hayes nodded grimly. We're getting close, but we need concrete evidence before we can move. These are career military officers with impeccable records on paper. Accusations without proof could destroy innocent reputations and damage the investigation. I understand, sir. I'll continue monitoring and gathering evidence. But I think Morrison might be starting to suspect something. The way he looked at me today. Be careful, Sarah. If they realize who you are and what you're doing, this could become very dangerous very quickly. As they concluded their meeting, Sarah reflected on the complexity of her situation. She was simultaneously invisible and exposed, trusted with the most sensitive information, while constantly at risk of discovery. Every day required her to balance the competing demands of her cover identity with her responsibilities as an intelligence officer. The following weeks brought new challenges and revelations. Sarah discovered that the security breach was more extensive than initially suspected. Multiple officials appeared to be involved in a sophisticated network that had been operating for years. The foreign agents weren't just buying random classified information, they were specifically targeting intelligence related to military technology and strategic operations. Sarah's investigation revealed that the network used a complex system of coded communications and dead drops to transfer information. Documents would disappear from secure locations, be photographed or copied, and then reappear without any obvious signs of tampering. The operation was so well organized that it had avoided detection for an extended period. As her understanding of the network deepened, Sarah realized that her own mission was becoming increasingly dangerous. The conspirators were growing suspicious of anyone who showed unusual interest in their activities, and several security personnel had recently been transferred or reassigned under questionable circumstances. One evening, while working late in Admiral Hayes's office, Sarah discovered that someone had been searching through her desk. The items had been carefully replaced, but she could detect the subtle signs that indicated her workspace had been examined. Someone was watching her, and her cover identity was no longer providing the protection she needed. The realization that she was now a target added urgency to her investigation. She needed to gather enough evidence to expose the network before they discovered her true identity, and either eliminated her or destroyed the evidence she had collected. The next phase of her mission would require her to take greater risks and potentially reveal herself to accomplish her objectives. As Sarah prepared for what she knew would be the most challenging weeks of her career, she reflected on the irony of her situation. She had spent months being invisible, gathering intelligence while hidden in plain sight. Soon, however, she might need to step out of the shadows and reveal who she really was, regardless of the consequences. The tension in the Pentagon had become palpable over the past few days. Sarah noticed increased security measures that seemed random on the surface but suggested that her investigation was creating ripples throughout the building. Additional guards appeared at checkpoints, document protocols became more stringent, and several high-ranking officials seemed unusually nervous during routine interactions. Sarah's desk had been searched 2 more times, each instance more obvious than the last. Whoever was conducting these searches wanted her to know she was being watched. The psychological pressure was deliberate, an attempt to make her nervous, sloppy, or most importantly, to reveal whether she was more than she appeared to be. During a particularly busy Tuesday morning, Sarah was delivering classified briefing materials to Conference Room Delta when she overheard a conversation that chilled her blood. Colonel Richards was speaking with someone she didn't recognize, a civilian in an expensive suit who clearly didn't belong in a secure military facility. "The situation is becoming untenable," Richards was saying. "There's been too much attention lately, and people are asking questions they shouldn't be asking. Our associates are not concerned with your comfort level, Colonel," the civilian replied with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "They are concerned with results and discretion. If you cannot maintain both, perhaps we need to reconsider our arrangement." Sarah pressed herself against the wall outside the conference room, her heart racing as she realized she was witnessing a direct conversation between one of her suspects and what appeared to be a foreign agent. The civilian's presence in the Pentagon represented a massive security breach in itself. "I can handle my end," Richards insisted. "But there's been unusual activity in the intelligence divisions. Someone is paying attention to things they normally ignore. Documents are being tracked more carefully, and there are new faces in places where I haven't seen new faces in years." The civilian stood and walked toward the window, his back to Richards. "New faces can disappear just as easily as old ones, Colonel. Our organization has extensive experience in making problems go away." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The conversation had just escalated from espionage to potential murder. She carefully extracted her phone and began recording, knowing that this evidence could be crucial to stopping not just the information theft but also preventing violence against innocent personnel. "I didn't sign up for that," Richard said, his voice carrying new tension. "Selling information is one thing, but I won't be part of anything that involves harm to American service members. You signed up for whatever we require when you accepted our first payment." The civilian replied coldly. "Your gambling debts were quite substantial, as I recall. And they continue to be substantial, despite our generous compensation for your services." Sarah realized that Richards wasn't just a willing participant in the espionage network, he was being coerced through financial desperation. This revelation added complexity to her investigation and potentially created an opportunity to flip him as a cooperating witness. The conversation ended abruptly when footsteps approached the conference room. Sarah quickly moved away from the door, pretending to organize files at a nearby desk. Admiral Foster emerged from the conference room, followed by Richards and the unknown civilian. Foster's presence was unexpected and disturbing. It suggested that the network's reach extended even higher into the military hierarchy than she had suspected. As the three men walked past her, the civilian's eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than comfortable. His gaze was calculating and predatory, the look of someone who evaluated people as potential threats or assets. Sarah maintained her submissive posture while internally memorizing every detail of his appearance for later identification. Later that afternoon, Sarah managed to arrange a brief meeting with Admiral Hayes. They met in the Pentagon's chapel, a location that provided both privacy and the appearance of casual encounter for anyone who might be watching. "We have a major problem," Sarah whispered as they knelt in adjacent pews. "There are foreign agents operating inside the Pentagon, and the network involves at least 3 senior officers that I've confirmed. Richards is being coerced, but Foster appears to be a willing participant." Admiral Hayes's face remained composed, but Sarah could see the tension in his jaw. "How certain are you about Foster?" "I saw him meeting with Richards and an unidentified foreign agent. They discussed eliminating witnesses and talked about ongoing operations as if Foster was fully informed about their activities. This is bigger than we thought. We need to move quickly, but we also need to be extremely careful. If Foster is involved, then the network has access to some of our most sensitive strategic planning." Sarah nodded, then shared her recording of the conversation she had overheard. Admiral Hayes listened intently, his expression growing darker as the implications became clear. "They're planning to silence anyone they perceive as a threat," Sarah concluded. "That likely includes me, and possibly you if they discover our real relationship. We need backup," Hayes decided. "I'm going to contact FBI counterintelligence through secure channels. This has moved beyond a military investigation." As they concluded their meeting, Sarah noticed that they weren't alone in the chapel. General Morrison sat several rows behind them, ostensibly in prayer but positioned where he could observe their interaction. The coincidence felt too convenient to be accidental. Sarah spent the following days walking a tightrope between gathering evidence and maintaining her cover. She had to be more careful than ever, knowing that multiple hostile parties were now aware of her presence and potentially suspicious of her activities. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While organizing Admiral Hayes's correspondence, she discovered a pattern in the document requests that revealed the scope of the information being stolen. The foreign agents weren't randomly collecting classified materials. They were specifically targeting intelligence related to a new naval technology that could revolutionize submarine warfare. The stolen information included technical specifications, operational protocols, and strategic deployment plans for the Navy's most advanced stealth submarine program. If this intelligence reached foreign governments, it could eliminate America's underwater superiority and potentially shift the global balance of naval power. Sarah realized that her investigation had uncovered not just espionage, but a threat to national security that could affect military operations worldwide. The stakes were higher than anyone had initially understood, and the pressure to resolve the situation quickly was overwhelming. Her analysis of the document requests revealed that the information theft followed a specific timeline that corresponded with Colonel Richards's gambling losses and debt payments. Each time Richards faced a financial crisis, classified documents related to the submarine program would be accessed and copied. The pattern was so clear that it would provide compelling evidence in any prosecution. However, Sarah also discovered that Admiral Foster had access to even more sensitive materials than Richards. Foster's involvement suggested that the foreign agents had recruited him independently, possibly using different leverage than the financial pressure applied to Richards. As Sarah compiled her evidence, she became aware that her time was running out. The network was becoming increasingly aggressive in their efforts to identify and eliminate threats. 2 Pentagon security personnel had been reassigned to different bases under mysterious circumstances, and rumors circulated about investigators asking unusual questions about document security protocols. The pressure intensified when Sarah discovered that her apartment had been searched. Like the searches of her office desk, this intrusion was meant to be discovered. Personal items had been moved, and her laptop showed signs of tampering that suggested sophisticated surveillance equipment had been installed. Sarah realized that she was now living under constant observation. Every conversation, every movement, and every action was being monitored by hostile agents who were trying to determine whether she posed a threat to their operations. The psychological strain of maintaining her cover while knowing she was being watched became enormous. Sarah had to act naturally while constantly evaluating every word and gesture for potential security implications. She couldn't contact Admiral Hayes through normal channels, couldn't research her suspects using Pentagon computers, and couldn't even return to her apartment without assuming that her activities were being recorded. Despite these challenges, Sarah continued gathering evidence while preparing for the inevitable confrontation. She knew that the network would eventually either eliminate her as a threat or attempt to recruit her as an asset. Either scenario would require her to abandon her cover and reveal her true identity and capabilities. As the second phase of her mission drew to a close, Sarah had documented enough evidence to expose the espionage network and prevent further damage to national security. However, she also understood that the most dangerous part of her assignment was just beginning. The network's willingness to use violence meant that her next moves could determine not just the success of her mission, but whether she would survive to see its completion. The morning of what would become the most crucial day of Sarah's career began like any other. She arrived at the Pentagon at her usual time, carrying Admiral Hayes's coffee and the day's briefing materials, maintaining the careful facade that had protected her for months. However, the atmosphere felt different, charged with an undercurrent of tension that suggested significant events were approaching. Sarah had spent the previous evening finalizing her evidence compilation and preparing multiple contingency plans. Her investigation had revealed the full scope of the espionage network, but she knew that gathering evidence was only half the battle. The real challenge would be exposing the network while protecting herself and preventing the destruction of crucial intelligence. As she organized Admiral Hayes's morning schedule, Sarah noticed unusual activity throughout the Pentagon's corridors. Security personnel were conducting additional checks at various checkpoints, and several high-ranking officials seemed to be moving with more purpose than usual. The signs suggested that multiple operations were converging simultaneously. Her suspicions were confirmed when Colonel Richards approached her desk with what appeared to be a routine document delivery. However, his demeanor was noticeably different, more nervous than usual, with the kind of agitation that suggested he was operating under significant stress. "Admiral Hayes needs to review these materials immediately," Richards said, placing a folder on her desk. "He should examine them privately, without any interruptions or assistance." Sarah recognized the subtle emphasis in his words as a coded message. Richards was warning her about something, possibly indicating that he had decided to cooperate with her investigation rather than continue serving the foreign agents who had been blackmailing him. After Richards departed, Sarah carefully examined the folder he had delivered. Hidden beneath routine administrative documents was a handwritten note that confirmed her suspicions. "They know who you are. Meeting tonight was compromised. Trust no one except Hayes. Evidence in locker 247. The revelation that her cover had been blown sent a surge of adrenaline through Sarah's system. All her careful preparation and months of patient investigation had led to this moment, the point where she would need to abandon her role as an invisible aide and take decisive action to complete her mission. Sarah knew that she had limited time before the network made their move against her. She needed to contact Admiral Hayes, secure the evidence Richards had mentioned, and coordinate with the FBI counterintelligence team that Hayes had contacted. However, she also understood that any unusual behavior on her part could trigger immediate retaliation from the network. Throughout the morning, Sarah maintained her normal routine while quietly implementing her emergency protocols. She used predetermined signals to alert Admiral Hayes that their cover had been compromised, arranged for backup copies of her evidence to be transmitted to secure locations, and prepared herself mentally for the confrontation that was now inevitable. The first sign of escalation came during the lunch hour. Sarah was approached by General Morrison, who rarely acknowledged her existence under normal circumstances. His sudden attention to a supposedly low-level aide was itself suspicious. "Miss Martinez," Morrison said with false friendliness, "I understand you've been very helpful to Admiral Hayes during his busy schedule lately." "I just do my job, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining her submissive persona while evaluating Morrison's behavior for signs of hostility. "Of course. I was wondering if you might be available to assist with a special project this afternoon. We need someone with your attention to detail to help organize some sensitive materials." Sarah recognized this as either a trap or an attempt to isolate her from Admiral Hayes and other potential allies. Morrison's request was phrased as an order disguised as a favor, making it difficult to refuse without appearing suspicious. "I would need to check with Admiral Hayes first, sir. He has me scheduled for several important tasks this afternoon." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure Admiral Hayes would want you to assist a fellow officer when requested. Why don't you meet me in Conference Room Charlie at 1400 hours? Come alone, and don't mention this to anyone else. The project requires absolute discretion." After Morrison departed, Sarah immediately began implementing her contingency plans. She couldn't attend the meeting without risking capture or elimination, but she also couldn't simply disappear without endangering Admiral Hayes and potentially alerting the network that their operation had been fully exposed. Sarah's solution was bold and dangerous. Instead of avoiding the confrontation, she decided to use it as an opportunity to gather final evidence while revealing her true identity in a controlled manner. She would attend Morrison's meeting, but she would do so as Commander Martinez rather than the submissive aide the network expected to encounter. At 1355 hours, Sarah made her way to Conference Room Charlie. However, instead of entering through the main door as Morrison expected, she used her security clearance to access the room through a maintenance entrance that allowed her to observe the setup before revealing herself. What she saw confirmed her worst suspicions. Morrison was not alone in the conference room. The same foreign agent she had seen meeting with Richards was present, along with Admiral Foster and two individuals she didn't recognize but whose bearing suggested military or intelligence backgrounds. Most disturbing was the presence of specialized equipment that appeared designed for interrogation or worse. The network hadn't arranged this meeting to recruit her. They had planned to extract information about her investigation before eliminating her as a threat. Sarah realized that this was her moment of truth. She could retreat, contact authorities, and potentially allow the network to escape while destroying evidence. Or she could take immediate action to prevent their escape while risking her own safety in a direct confrontation. Her decision was made easier when she overheard Morrison discussing plans to eliminate Admiral Hayes along with herself. The network had decided that both of them knew too much to be allowed to live, and they were planning to stage accidents that would remove them from the equation permanently. Sarah activated the emergency beacon that would alert Admiral Hayes and FBI counterintelligence to her location, then prepared to enter the conference room. However, instead of walking in as the nervous aide they expected, she would reveal herself as the Navy intelligence officer she truly was. At exactly 1,400 hours, Sarah opened the conference room door and stepped inside. The occupants looked up expecting to see a frightened support staffer, but instead found themselves facing a confident military officer whose demeanor had completely transformed. "Gentlemen," Sarah announced in a voice that carried authority rather than subservience, "I believe you've been looking for me." The transformation in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Morrison's face showed shock that quickly turned to anger, while the foreign agent reached for what was obviously a concealed weapon. Admiral Foster appeared genuinely surprised, suggesting that he might not have been fully informed about the network's more violent activities. "Commander Sarah Martinez, Naval Intelligence," she continued, producing her official identification. "You are all under investigation for espionage, treason, and conspiracy against the United States." Morrison recovered quickly from his initial surprise. "You have no authority here, whoever you are. And you've walked into a situation that you clearly don't understand." "I understand perfectly, General Morrison. I've been documenting your activities for months. I know about the submarine technology you've been selling, the foreign agents you've been working with, and your plans to eliminate witnesses to your crimes." The foreign agent had completed drawing his weapon and was pointing it directly at Sarah. "This conversation is over," he said with cold professionalism. "You will answer our questions, and then we will resolve this situation permanently." Sarah smiled calmly, showing no fear despite the obvious danger. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen. You see, this room has been under surveillance for the past 30 minutes, and federal agents are currently surrounding this building." As if summoned by her words, the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside became audible. The foreign agent's expression shifted from confidence to concern as he realized that his carefully planned operation was collapsing around him. Morrison drew his sidearm, creating a standoff between multiple armed individuals in the confined space of the conference room. "No one leaves this room until we figure out how to salvage this situation," he declared. Sarah maintained her composed demeanor despite being outnumbered and outgunned. "The situation is already beyond salvage, General. The only question now is whether you surrender peacefully or make this worse for yourselves." The tension in the room reached a breaking point as each participant evaluated their options and prepared for whatever would happen next. Sarah knew that the next few minutes would determine not just the success of her mission, but the fate of everyone involved in the espionage network she had worked so hard to expose. The standoff in conference room Charlie lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, long enough for federal agents to position themselves strategically around the Pentagon, but not long enough for the espionage network to devise an escape plan. Sarah stood calmly in the center of the room, surrounded by armed conspirators who were rapidly discovering that their carefully constructed operation was unraveling with devastating precision. General Morrison's hand trembled slightly as he maintained his aim, the weight of his situation becoming increasingly clear. Admiral Foster appeared to be calculating his options, possibly considering whether cooperation might reduce his eventual sentence. The foreign agent remained the most dangerous element in the room, a professional who understood that capture meant either life imprisonment or death, depending on his home country's relationship with the United States. "Commander Martinez," Morrison said, his voice carrying a mixture of desperation and resignation, "you have no idea what you've stumbled into. This operation involves national interests far beyond what your investigation has revealed." Sarah's response was measured and confident. "General Morrison, I know exactly what I've stumbled into. Your network has been selling classified submarine technology to foreign governments for 18 months. You've compromised operational security for 3 different naval programs, and your actions have potentially endangered American lives in multiple theaters of operation." The foreign agent shifted his position, attempting to find an angle that would allow him to neutralize Sarah while maintaining cover from potential sniper positions outside the windows. His movement was subtle but professional, indicating extensive training in tactical situations. "You are very well informed, Commander," the agent said with his slight accent. "Perhaps too well informed for your own safety. My government does not appreciate interference in legitimate business arrangements. Your government's arrangements stopped being legitimate the moment they involved treason against the United States," Sarah replied firmly. "And your threats stopped being effective the moment you decided to operate on American soil against American personnel." Admiral Foster finally spoke, his voice heavy with what appeared to be genuine regret. "Sarah, Commander Martinez, this situation is more complicated than you realize. The intelligence we provided wasn't random. We were feeding them outdated technical specifications and deliberately flawed operational data. We were running a counterintelligence operation." Sarah's expression didn't change, but internally she was rapidly reevaluating her assumptions. Foster's claim, if true, would completely alter the nature of the investigation and potentially transform the conspirators from traitors into patriots. However, it could also be a desperate lie designed to confuse the situation and create doubt about the evidence she had gathered. "Admiral Foster," Sarah said carefully, "if you were running an authorized counterintelligence operation, then you would have been coordinated with naval intelligence. I can assure you that no such operation exists in our files. Because it was classified above your level," Morrison interjected. "Even as a commander, you wouldn't necessarily have access to all ongoing operations." The door to the conference room opened suddenly, and Admiral Hayes entered with a calm authority that immediately dominated the space. Behind him came 3 individuals in dark suits who were obviously federal agents, their weapons drawn but held in low-ready positions. "Stand down, everyone," Admiral Hayes commanded in a voice that brooked no argument. "This situation is now under federal control." The transformation in the room's dynamics was immediate. Morrison and Foster lowered their weapons, recognizing the futility of resistance against federal agents. The foreign agent, however, made a desperate calculation and swung his pistol toward Admiral Hayes, apparently deciding that eliminating the senior officer might create enough chaos for an escape attempt. Sarah's response was instantaneous and decisive. Her months of maintaining a submissive facade had hidden her extensive combat training, and she moved with a speed that caught everyone off guard. In one fluid motion, she closed the distance to the foreign agent, disarmed him, and had him restrained before he could fire a shot. The silence that followed was broken by Admiral Hayes's quiet applause. "Excellent work, Commander Martinez. Your operational security has been flawless throughout this entire investigation." As federal agents secured the remaining conspirators, Admiral Hayes provided Sarah with information that finally clarified the complete picture. Admiral Foster's claims about a counterintelligence operation were partially true. He had been attempting to feed false information to foreign agents. However, his operation was unauthorized and had been compromised from the beginning. Foster genuinely believed he was serving his country, Admiral Hayes explained as they watched the conspirators being led away in handcuffs. But his unauthorized operation created security vulnerabilities that genuine foreign agents exploited. Morrison and Richards were feeding real classified information while Foster thought he was providing disinformation. The foreign agent, whose identity would later be confirmed as a senior intelligence operative from a hostile nation, had been running multiple assets within the Pentagon. Foster's unauthorized counterintelligence operation had actually made it easier for the agent to identify and exploit security weaknesses. Sarah's investigation had been more successful than anyone initially realized. Not only had she exposed the espionage network, but she had also uncovered the unauthorized operation that had enabled foreign intelligence services to penetrate American military security. As the immediate crisis concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on the complexity of intelligence work in the modern era. The line between patriotism and treason could be surprisingly thin when well-intentioned officers made decisions without proper coordination and oversight. The aftermath of the operation proved to be as complex as the investigation itself. Colonel Richards, faced with evidence of his cooperation with foreign agents, agreed to provide testimony in exchange for reduced charges. His financial desperation had made him vulnerable to recruitment, but his genuine remorse and willingness to cooperate helped authorities understand how foreign intelligence services targeted and manipulated American military personnel. General Morrison's case was more complicated. While he had clearly violated security protocols and potentially committed treason, his motivations appeared to be a misguided belief that he was protecting American interests through unauthorized negotiations with foreign governments. His actions had endangered national security, but his intentions might have been patriotic, however, misguided. Admiral Foster faced the most complex legal situation. His unauthorized counterintelligence operation had violated numerous regulations and potentially enabled foreign espionage, but his intentions had clearly been to serve American interests. The courts would need to determine whether good intentions could mitigate the serious consequences of his unauthorized actions. 3 weeks after the confrontation in Conference Room Charlie, Sarah found herself in a very different conference room, receiving commendations from senior officials throughout the Defense Department. Her successful investigation had prevented further damage to national security and exposed vulnerabilities that would be addressed through improved security protocols. However, the moment that would define her career occurred when Admiral William Thompson, the Chief of Naval Operations, entered the briefing room to personally recognize her achievements. As he approached, every person in the room came to attention, but what happened next surprised everyone present. Admiral Thompson didn't simply shake Sarah's hand or pin a medal on her uniform. Instead, he came to a full military salute, acknowledging her not just as a successful intelligence officer, but as someone whose courage and dedication had served the nation with exceptional distinction. The room fell completely silent as America's highest-ranking naval officer held his salute, waiting for Sarah's response. The gesture was unprecedented. A 4-star admiral saluting a commander, and everyone present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary. Sarah returned the salute with precision and pride, finally, receiving the recognition that her months of dangerous undercover work had earned. As Admiral Thompson lowered his hand, he spoke words that would be remembered by everyone in the room. "Commander Martinez, your service represents the highest traditions of naval intelligence and the United States Navy. Your courage, professionalism, and dedication have protected American lives and preserved national security. This nation owes you a debt that cannot be fully repaid." The applause that followed filled the conference room and spilled into the corridors beyond. Sarah had spent months being invisible, overlooked, and underestimated. Now, finally, she was being seen for who she truly was, a highly skilled intelligence officer whose work had prevented a national security disaster. As the ceremony concluded and officials began to disperse, Sarah reflected on the irony of her journey. She had succeeded precisely because no one had suspected that the quiet aide organizing files and serving coffee was actually one of the Navy's most capable intelligence officers. Her ability to hide in plain sight had been her greatest asset, allowing her to observe, investigate, and ultimately expose threats that more obvious investigators might never have detected. The foreign agent and his network had made a fundamental error in their assessment of American military personnel. They had assumed that someone who appeared ordinary must be ordinary, that someone who seemed powerless must be powerless. Their prejudices and assumptions had blinded them to the possibility that their most dangerous adversary was standing right in front of them, filing their reports and organizing their schedules. Sarah's story became legendary within intelligence circles, not just for her successful investigation, but for the elegant way she had used others' assumptions against them. She had turned invisibility into a superpower, transforming her apparent weakness into her greatest strength. Years later, when Sarah had advanced to senior positions within naval intelligence, she would tell new recruits that the most powerful weapon in an intelligence officer's arsenal was often the enemy's own preconceptions. The foreign agents had been so convinced of their own superiority that they never considered the possibility that a simple aide might be their downfall. The salute that Admiral Thompson had given her represented more than recognition of her specific achievements. It symbolized acknowledgement that intelligence work often required officers to sacrifice recognition and glory for effectiveness and mission success. Sarah had spent months being overlooked and underestimated, enduring dismissive treatment and casual disrespect, all in service of a greater purpose. As Sarah continued her career, she carried with her the lesson that true strength sometimes meant appearing weak, that real power often came from being underestimated, and that the most effective intelligence officers were often those who could blend seamlessly into the background while observing everything around them. The Admiral's salute had left everyone speechless not just because of its unprecedented nature, but because it represented the moment when Sarah's true identity was finally revealed to those who had unknowingly worked alongside one of the Navy's most capable officers. They believed she was merely the aide, until that salute revealed she was so much more.